Well, good morning. It's great to have you all here, and great to everyone that's joining us online. It's great to have you as well. So we've been in this series, Difference Makers, and just how we can make a difference. And I'm going to be wrapping the series up, and I'm going to talk about a really important way that we make a difference. But it's also one that can carry a little bit of tension. I'm going to talk about giving. And I know that when we talk about giving, we've got different experiences with church or religion, and there can be a mix of things. I know for some of you, this can be a tough subject. For others of you, you sit in this really beautiful place on it. I was talking with a guy here not too long ago, a young guy. They just had their first child, and they're looking to buy a house. And I remember he was talking about here's their plan. They're trying to save up for that down payment. And then he told me what the down payment was. And this is just a regular entry level kind of house. And when he said here's what we've got to come up with, I remember just thinking, and I didn't say this to him out loud, but I remember thinking, that's a little bit more than what my wife and I paid for our first house. And I was just and I just felt man, here's this young guy, and he's just, trying to make everything work. And just the thought of okay, to talk about giving, it's got to just feel like there's one more thing here. And we're just trying to make ends meet. And I'm sure that there are some of you that when we talk about giving, it's man, I just feel exhausted, and I'm just trying to get things to work. And is this just one more thing? And what I want to say is, be at ease. This morning is not about trying to put more weight on anybody with this. I remember talking with a guy after a service, and he was asking me some questions about Casas. He had been here, I don't know, maybe a month, and was really liking it, but wanted to have some answers to some questions about how our board functioned and some different things. And then as he was asking the questions, I kind of realized what he was after. And I just said to him, I said, hey, we have an independent firm that actually either audits or reviews our finances and our accounting every year. And we just got the report back. And I said, would you like a copy of it? And the second I said, you could have a copy of it, if you can see a separate audit, it was just all of this tension just went and he goes, I don't think I do. I think just knowing that you do that here, that answers my question. And in a beautiful way, I thought I love the fact that maybe there's something that lets some tension out for him. But I was also a little sad because I realized there's a story there, that somewhere he was a part of a church that wasn't trustworthy, and they did some things, and he still feels the tension of that. Years and years ago, there was a guy shared a real struggle he was having. He was getting near retirement, wanted to retire early. And so he talked with it was called the Arizona Baptist Foundation. And in talking with them, they were like, you know what, we can help you retire early. You invest your money with us. And he invested probably over 90% of his retirement money with the Arizona Baptist Foundation. And within 6 months of doing that, and of course, he's I know I can trust them. These are Christians and Christian leaders, and they'll take this money and invest it, and very trustworthy. Within 6 months of doing that, they were put under investigation, I think it's by the IRS or the federal government, for defrauding people, and they defrauded him. That case, when it went to court, it ended up being the largest nonprofit in American history to file for bankruptcy. And this was right here in Arizona. They ended up defrauding, I think it was $530 million. And suddenly that guy goes from these are trustworthy people that can help me with this, to suddenly not even being able to retire early, but he was I don't know when I'll ever be able to retire in all of this. And I think about what he carries. And I know that in this room, there are some of you who maybe have had something similar, and that gets added to the complexity of all that's going on here. And so when you look around in this room, with this many people, it's a sea of complexity that when we talk about this issue of giving, we've got good stories and bad stories. And so as we talk about this here this morning, I get that it's easy to avoid this topic about giving because it's just like all these different things. But it's important that we do talk about it because it really is an important part of how we as followers of Christ can make a difference. But I also want to talk about it in a way that has a sensitivity to where we're all coming from in this. And one of the things that I think would be important to me is that I would want you to know that when we talk about giving, what we're not talking about here is a church. And so if there's a part of this where you're wondering, I want to just put you at ease or say, if you feel like there's something that I've said or that we say as a church about giving that steps on one of these things a little bit, come and ask us. So let me just go through a few things before I move on to my sermon that as a church, when we talk about giving, this is what we're not talking about. We are not talking about motivating anyone out of guilt or shame or comparison, right? We never want to do that around here. And I know some of you have experienced that personally sometimes in your own spiritual journey. It is not about evaluating your spiritual journey. It's not about saying, okay, I'm going to teach a sermon on giving, and this is a way to evaluate where you are in your spiritual journey in some way. And it's never about how much God loves you. That if you think you're hearing that message from us, please come and talk to me. Because that is not who we are or where we're coming from in this. But I do want you to understand my heart. I want you to understand something that I see in giving that is important, even to how we as a church think about giving in this. And so I'm going to take some time this morning and really walk through one aspect of something I believe is important when we think about giving. And this kind of giving that I'm going to describe here, I unapologetically say, if you understand this, I want to call you to pray about it, to think about it. I want to encourage you even to give in this way. And I'm going to give it a label, for lack of a better term on it. I'm going to call this missional giving. And missional giving to me is a kind of giving that we actually see modeled in the New Testament. And there's this great example of missional giving that you see in this moment where there are some churches in the north of Greece, in the area of Macedonia, that are struggling because it's just economic hard times in that part of Greece at this moment. There's a lot of reasons why that I'm not going to get into, but there's a church in Corinth that is in southern Greece that is not going through the economic hardship that those churches in northern Greece are going through. And this church in Corinth decides that they want to give a very sizable gift to help these churches in the northern part of Greece. And Paul, the Apostle Paul, writes this letter to the church in Corinth, and he's dealing with a lot of things, but he actually takes up a sizable chunk of that letter and talks to the church in Corinth about giving, about what they're doing and making plans for it. But he walks out some things about giving that I want us to see this morning. And one thing really in particular. So if you have your Bibles, turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 9. 2 Corinthians chapter 9. And while chapters 8 and 9 talk about this whole situation, I'm going to primarily park on this one verse because he lays out this simple principle or illustration that he talks about here that I want to use to form our understanding of what I'm calling missional giving here. So here's what he says. Look at verse 6. He says this: remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, And whoever sows generously will also reap generously. So he uses this simple little agricultural illustration to describe this kind of giving. And while we may look at this, and you've heard us talk about sowing and reaping in the past, or you've probably heard something similar to this, it seems really straightforward. And there's a part of it that is straightforward. But can I say that in the first century, for this church in Corinth, this would have been a noticeable difference from what they would have understood about giving. There's a principle in this that would have been really new for them, because they would have operated off of a notion that would have been different for them. In their culture, and I'll speak mostly to the Jewish culture. So picture Jewish Christians would have come from this Jewish background about giving. So they would have had a number of tithes, or what they would have actually called at this point taxes. So there was like a first fruits tithe. And first century, it was probably called a festival tax, where they would have had, think of the money that they have earned. And let's go with the illustration. So he talks about sowing and reaping. So think of like sowing, you're gonna sow with seeds. So think about your resources as like, I don't know, like a dish or a bowl full of seeds, right? And so the first thing they would have understood is like, okay, I've got this like dish or bowl of seeds. First 10% goes to the festival tax. You do that. Now, they also had a Levitical tax. So then there's another 10% that goes to Levitical tax. And they broke, and this was kind of, I want to say ingenious, but maybe that's the wrong way to put this. The way they broke down the Levitical tax, there was a second part that would kick in. So there was the 10% for the Levitical tax, but then the second part of the Levitical tax had this other tax that probably would have been, I don't know, somewhere between like 3 to 8% on top of that. So you're already at like 25, 28% on there. And then there would have been what they called the temple tax that would go on that. And that wasn't a percentage. That was more of like a once a year, like flat tax, so to speak. And then on top of that, there would have been anytime they would have done sin or guilt offerings, there would have been a cost to that of things that they would have had to have purchased for those offerings that kind of went like a tax. And this is what they would have understood. It's also important to understand that for them, the religious life and culture, the culture they were in, would have mixed like the civic life and the religious life. So to them, this is just what you do. You are obligated to do this. And that's how they saw it. Like, I've got my bowl of seeds, and my act of giving is all about that initial act of I'm gonna take a certain percentage of this, and I'm going to just give this to God. And that's what I'm going to do. There's a very obligatory part to what that is. That's how they would have understood it. Much the same way, and we all understand this to some degree, right? Because of regular taxes, but also like growing up. Remember a moment when you were growing up and one of your parents said, I want you to do such and such, and you were like, but why? Why am I supposed to do that? And then you had your parent turn around and go, because I said so. This was kind of the because I said so model, okay? It was just like, here are the things, and we've got verses going back in the Old Testament and the Torah, and so you just do but why? Because it says so, and you just do these sorts of things. And maybe some of you grew up and that's just how this was handled. You better give this because God's gonna be upset if you don't, and it's just, I'm gonna do this because God said so, or because I think this is what makes me a good person. Now, let me say this too. I'm not saying that's wrong, okay? But you might not find it very motivational. You might find that there's moments where that's been abused in different ways, and it's left you in some other spot. And what Paul does in 2 Corinthians is he introduces this other thing, and he says, can I talk to you about what I would like to have motivate you? Let me give you a way to see this and think about this that maybe is different than how you have thought about this. And it starts with this illustration of, in fact, look back at it again. Look back at verse 6. He says, remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows generously will reap generously. And he adds this piece about there's gonna be a harvest. And I want you to think about that as well. There is a field that you're gonna harvest out of. And you think about what the majority of the people in that church would have seen before, right? They would have been very familiar with, okay, I've got my bowl or my dish, and I'm gonna take some seeds out, and this will be my act of faith or sacrifice or worship here. But you know what they never thought about? Was the field. They never thought about there's a field of opportunity. If these are like seeds, and this act of faith and sacrifice and worship is like taking seeds and planting them into that field, right? They never thought about what was never put in front of them was that field that would be out there, right? When you think about a farmer, right? When a farmer plants seeds, a farmer doesn't go out and go to all the trouble to plant seeds in that field and then says, well, I've planted all the seeds, and then walks away and never comes back to check on it. Never comes back at harvest time. And it just says, well, I planted the seeds. I guess I'll come back in a year and plant some more seeds because that's what I'm supposed to do. Like, no, that farmer's gonna go back and check on things. That farmer cares about what's going on because you know what the farmer has in mind? That farmer, even before he planted those seeds, that farmer has got a vision or a picture of not just a field of dirt, right? That farmer's like, I've got a picture of a field of of a crop, of whatever I planted. Their heart goes out to that. There's something they want to see happen. They've got cares and desires in all of this. And here's the point. Here's the one point of this morning that I want you to take away from this. Missional giving asks you to hold a desire for something that matters. That's what missional giving does. When he says, listen, I want you to remember, when you go to sow, like when you go with that act of giving, I want to make sure you're thinking about that your sowing is connected to a moment where you're gonna harvest something. And this is a big deal. It changes so much about how you think about giving if you think in this way, because a farmer doesn't go out and plant seeds in a field and just think of it like in an obligatory way. Well, I'm a farmer, and so I guess I'm supposed to just plant seeds just because. It's like, no, a farmer goes, I plant seeds because things grow, seeds grow. And I'm a farmer because of what I'm going to harvest in this. And I know this sounds like a strange, like straightforward thing, but when you apply it to giving, it becomes a really big deal. Because friends, that harvest, that field is about people. It's about God's kingdom. It's about the beautiful things that God wants to see and do in this world. And for a church, that's what matters, right? What Paul is saying is, like he loves that this church in Corinth is, and on their own prior, they were already deciding that they were going to give this gift. And it's like Paul is saying, and please don't forget that the gift you're giving, there's a harvest of people. You're going to do something tangible, but something spiritual up there. Let me give you an example that I've seen right here in this church. So just a couple of years ago, I got this text message from a guy named Rick. And Rick was gonna come and visit Casas, and I still am, I'm really good friends with his younger brother. And so there was a connection there. Rick had been involved, he was a police officer and then got involved with ministry, did some wonderful work, but was really at a place where he was just burned out on ministry, was no longer in ministry, but just kind of burned out on life and on God and the Bible, and just he just was not in a good place, but felt like I need to go check out some churches somehow. And so he texted me and just said, hey, I'm coming, we know Todd, and I'm coming to check out your church. And I knew a little bit about his background, a little bit about where he'd pastored and what he believed and stuff. And my first thought was, man, I don't know that we're a good fit for him. And sure enough, he showed up here at church. And we sat through the service, and I remember we talked for the first time since he had kind of come back, and we talked after the service, and he had talked about what he thought and everything. And I just remember thinking, I don't know, just based on where he is, and not that he's in a dry place, but just where I assumed he was theologically and what he would want out of a church, I just thought maybe we're not the best fit for you. And so I kind of uninvited him to come, right? Did it really in a very nice way. But I was just thinking down the road, we're just gonna frustrate you, and I bet we're not gonna help you. And so I just kind of uninvited him. And he came back anyway the next Sunday. And he sat through that, and I kind of uninvited him again, because I just you're getting all excited now, and we're just gonna disappoint you even more in this thing. Long story short, he just kept coming back and getting more and more excited. But as he did, it's interesting that as he just experienced life here, one of the things that happened early on was he felt this kind of acceptance. And he felt like this freshness, even as how we talked about the spiritual life and the Bible. Next thing you know, he's involved with guest services, and he would just come bounding up when I would see him. And if you know Rick, he is a guy who is not short on energy, and he was just got excited about this place. He ended up coming to a leadership meeting that he said was on accident. He came to this leadership meeting. He said, I'm sitting there in the middle of this meeting and realized I'm not supposed to be here. And he's like, I don't know how to get out of this right. And he said, but then as you started talking, I got so excited. I was like, well, that's why I like being at this place. This is where this church is going. He goes, at that point, I was like, I don't care if you realize I'm not supposed to be here. I'm staying for this meeting because I want to see the rest of this thing. He ended up getting involved in our groups ministry. He ended up getting involved in our outreach ministry. In fact, remember we did the Love Our City. He went and participated with one of our partners out there. And all of a sudden, he goes from a guy who is being ministered to by you all as a community to just seeing the goodness that is happening and now wanting to be a part of passing that goodness on. I remember one Sunday he came up and he was laughing because he decided to start volunteering for this ministry in Midtown on a semi-regular basis after we did the Love Our City thing. And he said, when I was a police officer, I worked that area, and there were lots of times where I would have to arrest people and all this stuff. And he says, and now I don't have to arrest people. In fact, I was sharing the gospel with some people that I think I had arrested a long time ago. And he says, it's just such a different feeling. And it's so much better. And you could just see. And there was just this beautiful thing happening. But here's what I want you to catch. When he showed up here, he showed up like a barren dirt field. I wish you could have seen him his first Sunday here. He was not a guy holding much hope. Not much hope in the church. Not much hope in his own spiritual journey. But you all, it's like you just kept planting seeds in the soil of the field that he was standing in. He walked in this place and felt honestly, truly welcomed. He felt accepted. And for him, you have to know this, from what he came from, the idea that he would be in this dry, parched place spiritually with doubts and struggles and a little bit of an attitude maybe about things, and that this was a place that it's just you know what, that's okay. If you're willing to come in here, we're gonna love you regardless. You get to be where you honestly are. That level of acceptance was just so fresh for where he was in his spiritual journey and what he understood, and it has been a Christian most of his life. but he had never experienced this acceptance of Jesus in that way. And you changed him on that. So much so that he's like, I'm gonna go be a part of the, the guest services because I wanna welcome people the way I was welcomed. He experienced community with you all and then wanted to create community in there. And now I am sad to say, but also happy to say, he is now leaving. And back when I was inviting him to leave, he wouldn't leave. And now I want him to stay and he's leaving, right? But here's why. Because he's gonna go and serve on staff as a minister in a church here in Tucson. Because he wants to take what he experienced here there. This is what Paul is talking about. To have a vision of seeing those things happen, right? When a farmer goes out and plants seeds, they want something out of it. They may not know exactly what it's gonna be, right? They don't get to dictate exactly how tall the plant is gonna be and all of those things, right? There's an act of faith in this where we say, God, I'm gonna give some things. But as I give these, I trust them into the soil that I'm putting them in. I trust them to this community. I trust them to God. And we get to be a part of going back to that field and nurturing that field. And we get to go back to those fields and reap something that God has been doing in and through all of that. That is the beautiful part of this. And what I want to encourage you in is that when it comes to this idea of giving, it's important to hold that, because what Paul is saying is, I want you to remember when you go to sow, you gotta remember the reaping part, because as you think about what you want to reap, it will affect how you go about sowing. It'll affect how much you sow. It'll affect when and where and how and all of those things. And even more so, it will affect your own heart. And this is important. I want you to look at one more thing that he says here. Look at verse 7. He says this in verse 7. He says, each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And what Paul is saying is, you know what God would love is more than just saying, okay, I'm gonna give because I'm supposed to. And again, if that's the place you're in, that is okay. But God is inviting you to give with a kind of vision of maybe the mission of what God's wanting to do with this, right? When he says not under compulsion, but cheerfully. You know what makes you cheerful in your giving? Is when you think about, I am investing something because there's something that's going to bring me joy on the other side. And it just changes your whole motivation for giving when you think about, I'm investing in something and I look forward to what I'm going to get on the other side of this. That's missional giving. And when I think about us as a church, I want you to think we have a mission. And when we talk about our mission, I want you to think of our mission. This is God's unique call on us as a church. And I believe there are things that we share with every other church about extending God's kingdom and being centered in Christ. But I also think God gives every church some unique callings. And the way we talk about our unique calling around here is that we want to be loving people into the acceptance and freedom of Jesus Christ. This is our mission. This is what we're about. And to see people experience that acceptance, to see someone who has an image of God, that God either hates them or that God loves them conditionally, or that like the belief that they would never find acceptance with God, even if they've already become a Christian. Our mission is not just for people who have not become Christians yet. It's for anybody that needs to experience what it is like on a daily basis to live out of that acceptance and freedom of Jesus Christ. To be the kind of church that loves people into that, That is beautiful. That sets people free. Like, I think about Rick, where he sits in his spiritual journey, how he sees God, his enthusiasm for scripture right now, he bounces. I swear, I promise you, like the last time I talked with him and he was talking about something, he was like this. He's just like excited with this thing. And when I see that, I'm like, it's worth it. It's worth it to think about where he was and where he is now. I'm like, that just brings joy to my heart. It makes it easy for Angie and I to say, I'll invest more of my resources into that because I want more of that. I want to encourage you to not think about giving as an obligation. I want to encourage you to think about what is the mission of this church. What are the beautiful things that you think about that you want God to do in and around you? I want you dreaming about dirt fields becoming rich fields of crops in the lives of people. That's what we want here. I think about what God is doing through our mission. And I want to speak to this just in a real tangible way in this. This last year, and even before this, one of the things that I saw as senior pastor around here is that in order for acceptance and love and freedom as an experience of being in a relationship with Jesus Christ, that what more people were needing in our church was they needed to experience the acceptance and love and freedom of Jesus within the context of relationship. There's just a simple reality. You can't love alone. You can't just go and study all about love and learn, the Greek word for it and all the stuff about it. To really understand love in a transformational way, you've got to be in a relationship, because you've got to have places where you practice loving. You've got to have places where you get to experience being loved, right? You need to have moments where there is someone who is hard to love, right? You'll learn more about love trying to love someone who is hard to love as you will someone who is easy to love. And one of the things that I looked at as the leader of this place was I just realized we need to do a better job of creating more opportunities for more people within our church to be in community. And so from a strategic standpoint, I sat back with our staff and our senior staff and said, we've got to create more strategies and make a greater investment in what we can do so that you all that anyone who wants to make a move towards being in more relationship or in a group, I want you to have that opportunity. And so we made a major investment in our budget on a personnel side so that we in the coming year can do more to create more opportunity for groups. Because if you don't have a place where you can belong, or like if you're, you just can't love alone. And so we've got to create more groups. And you know what I believe? I believe it's worth it, because I can't tell you the numbers of times I hear stories from people that are in groups in this place and the life change that they've experienced. When you guys start rubbing shoulders with one another and figuring out what love means, and you start applying stuff from the sermons or stuff you're studying in scripture, it is amazing how transformation takes place. And you know what I'm looking forward to? I'm looking forward to the stories I'm going to hear about people that have become a part of this church and how there was a group that you belong to that changed your life. But there's something even more with this. There's something like I want every one of you to experience that, the grace of Jesus. I want you to experience the acceptance of Jesus, his freedom, his love. But even beyond that, there's something more that I want you to experience. And that is being a part of helping someone else experience it. Because there is no joy in this world that compares to when you're the one that is a part of bringing that acceptance or that love or that freedom to someone else. When Jesus is working through you to bring that to someone else, and you are right there and you see it on their face, that is a beautiful thing. That's why I love the story about Rick, is because it's like, I was there when I was uninviting him, right? And I'm so glad he didn't pay attention at that moment, because it's like I got to play a little role, and so did his brother. And to see where he is now is so beautiful, right? I want to see more of you with that opportunity. I think about our campus, right? Here's a place where we make a difference in our giving. Our campus, it was built back in the late 90s. It's hard for me to believe that, but our campus is now old, right? It's like it wants to fall apart. It needs work. And there's a part of this where it's just like, well, no, I don't like the idea of putting money into the buildings. I'm like, that's not the church. Like, we're the church, right? And we fix a roof or something and no one goes, whoa, I saw that roof is fixed, right? Because you can't even see part of the roof, right? It's like, we fixed those water pipes that you didn't know about, right? It's just like, there's a part of it where it's like, no one likes that. But there's a reality in this. And I was talking with our executive pastor, Miles, earlier this week. He had come across this stat and he said, and I think it was 20%. 20% of people who are visiting churches will end up never coming back to that church again, because within I think it was the first 5 minutes, what they experienced with the campus, that there was something run down or broken, or there was something that was cold or just contrary to the values of that church. And it hit me, man, that's so true. If someone comes on this campus, and the bathroom doesn't work, or the water fountain doesn't work, or it looks like we don't care about it, what we're not communicating in those moments subconsciously to them are the values that we hold dear. What we've not communicated to them is, you matter, and we were actually thinking about you before you got here. And I was like, well, we need to keep thinking about our campus, and it's getting old, and we need to put some seeds into our campus, because I want people, when they come here, I want them, even if it's subconscious, I want them to feel the warmth and the consideration and the welcomeness that I know is in your hearts. Because it doesn't take somebody very long to sit in this community and not experience your acceptance and your joy. I want them to experience that. I think about this with our high school ministry. With our high school ministry, from the money that you give, from the seeds that you give to this community, there is a substantial part that we put into that high school ministry simply to lower the cost of our camps and trips and major activities in our student ministries. And there's a simple reason why. We want as many students as possible to go on those trips, to be a part of those activities. Because we have just watched for decades that when students are a part of those, they will come back. God has used those consistently over the years to make a difference in their lives. And I want to see those students back here when they're starting their families, when they're getting old. They're our future. And I want to invest in them so that we have as many of those, as many students as possible can be a part of what's happening on that. I think about what we are doing. We are investing more and more these days into the larger community and into our city to love on and care for people and create new partners the thing I've learned about that is we will not be able to outgive the needs that are in our city, right? They are always there. But the thing I have watched with you all, we have not wasted one moment with how we have loved on people who have needed it in our city. We have done some things that have lifted up the name of Christ in the most beautiful ways, that have caused people to trust him in ways they never would have before. you are shining in some beautiful ways in that. And what I want you to see when you go to think about the difference you can make, right? When you think about your little bowl of seeds or money that you have, I don't want you to just think, okay, what do I need to give? Like, what does Glenn want me to give? What does God want me to give? I want you to look up and think about, there's a field. There's a harvest. There's this beautiful thing that my church has a mission for that we want to do. And as you think about that, let that be the driver to you then coming back and saying, okay, what do I want to plant into the soil of the church? How do I want to tithe into this place to see what God will do? And I promise you, you will find something filled with joy, and you will make a difference that will last, because I don't just want a difference made in your life. I want all of you to experience what it is to actually be a difference maker with what God has given you.